I'm going to close this. And there we go. Now we should be live.
I'm looking.
Yeah. When we do this back and forth, we're actually behind by a few minutes, I think. Hello, Park Slope. We're here. I'm Sony.
And I'm Christy.
Hey, that was pretty good today.
Not bad. We're getting banter.
We're getting a little better at it. We are joined by Doug Schneider.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome, Doug.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So Doug lives here in Park Slope. He is a district leader for the Brooklyn Democratic Party, and he is an attorney, right? You have argued cases involving defamation and workplace discrimination. You also have 2 children, one who is at PS 107, our very own. You are married to Joni, who has been appointed by the mayor. Is she still the director over there at Oath?
She's the commissioner of Oath. Yeah.
The commissioner of Oath, sorry, which is a tribunal, and that's where city agencies file civil summonses, right? But let's move back to Doug now. You might recognize Doug from our own Facebook page. He arranged some community sidewalk shoveling in the winter to clear a little space to get from a crosswalk onto a sidewalk without doing a hurdle over the snow. And a few years ago, in a standing room only hearing at the Landmarks Preservation Commission, this is what Doug said about the Pavilion Theater project, which was supposed to have a 5-story condominium building adjacent to it. He said, whatever we approve here will reverberate in the future. And of course, we aren't getting the condos, we are getting an ample hills. So, Doug, welcome to our group. Thank you for being here. We're excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Sony, Christy, Sylvia, and everybody else. It's really a pleasure to be here as a participant in the Park Slope Together webpage, which I really think has brought the community together during the pandemic and really has evolved into a real community group where people are not just sharing ways to get involved in the community, but also getting advice and trying to set up play dates for their cats. I mean, it really is just a great community resource. So like you said, Sony, I am a civil rights attorney. I am a street safety advocate, and of course, I'm a public school parent. I've lived in the district for the last 15 years, and as you mentioned, with my wife Joni, I petitioned the Board of Elections to be able to run as Joni Kletter's husband, but they wouldn't let me do that. We have 2 kids, Micah, who is 7 and first grader at 107, and then my daughter Evie, who is at preschool at Beth Elohim. Since my wife and I moved here, we've been very involved in the community. We were both trustees of the Park Slope Civic Council, which is where I did the work with the community to prevent the pavilion from being turned into luxury housing. And you mentioned the ample hill, and what's so great about the work that we did at Bartell Pritchard is that it's not only that we preserved a movie theater, the Nighthawk, a huge improvement over the pavilion, but that ample hill that you referenced was a vacant space for 15 years from the day that the Old Circles restaurant left. And so, what is better in the community? A luxury condo that services a few people, or this great community space that we've built. And so I think that's the type of thing that I love doing. That's why I got involved in the community. I was on the district committee of Brad Lander's participatory budgeting for 5 years. I was the volunteer parent coordinator at what they call Shir LaShabbat, the Saturday morning children's service over at our synagogue, Beth Elohim, where I now sit on the school reopening task force at the preschool. I love, Brooklyn. I love living in Brooklyn. I love everything about Brooklyn. My favorite time of day is the 17-block walk to preschool. Because on that walk, we first, we see Amo Bassam, Uncle Bassam, who owns, Junior's Deli and spoils my kids. And then we see Abuelo Greg, who, anybody who knows him knows that he's like basically the mayor of 8th Avenue, and he loves to chase around my kids and hide and jump out at them, right? And then we see Betty, the crossing guard in front of St. Saviour's, who's also lived in the neighborhood, family going back forever. And then finally we get to school and there's, Stephen from the Virgin Islands giving the kids, a high five, every single one before they go into school. And I think that makes our community really, really special. And I really got involved because I wanted to give back to the community that gives so much to me and my family and gives me an opportunity, to make a difference. And, I've really enjoyed the work I've done. We talked about the pavilion. We talked about my personal obsession about sidewalks and making sure that when it snows, our sidewalks are cleared so everybody in our community can get around. It is why I was able to fix dangerous conditions on the Ocean Parkway bike lane, and why I ran for Democratic district leader. And so, as we got closer to this election, I spent a lot of time thinking about whether or not I wanted to run. And, the biggest thing for me is that I wanted to make sure that I could run for office and still be the dad that I want to be. To be honest, there's no other job I ever wanted other than to be a dad. And as somebody who works for myself, I've had the flexibility always to be able to take off at a moment's notice, to take care of the kids, to be the class parent, to go on the, on the field trips. And that's the most important thing to me. And the moment that I decided to run was when they shut down schools. And there was a buildup to shutting down schools, right? And they were talking about it. And the mayor waited until Sunday. He waited until Sunday to shut down the schools on Monday. And we live in a city that gives 4 days advance notice when they close down restaurants, but less than 4 hours when they close down schools. And that's because there's nobody in that room where decisions are being made that is sitting there thinking, what am I going to do for childcare tomorrow? And so I really made the decision to run because I really thought it was vitally important to have the voice of parents, especially parents of younger children, in the room when decisions are made. As I mentioned, because I work for myself, I was able to pick up the responsibility for supervising, remote learning. And I saw with my own 2 eyes the harm that it was doing to our children in terms of not just their academic achievement, but their social and emotional development and their mental health. And I started talking about the need for a long-term plan to open schools, specifically to build to the moment that we are at right now, so that there was a progression to build towards a time when it would be safe to open schools. And so, schools are at one of the top issues that I am focused on. We need next year, first of all, we need full-time in-person learning 5 days a week. But we also need to make sure that we have the resources in our schools to deal with healing from remote learning for our kids and their social and emotional development, their mental health. And every school needs to have school psychologists, social workers, trauma-informed professionals, because there's going to be a lot of kids coming back to school who suffered real trauma. And I also want to create a pandemic playbook so that this planning happens in advance, so that we never find ourselves in this situation again, because we've pre-planned. The other thing that COVID really highlighted for me is how much the city doesn't work for working parents, and especially working mothers. We all know that 75% of the people that have take on unpaid care work, and the same is true for remote learning, have been working mothers. And it is from this experience and my experience representing women in discrimination cases, pregnancy discrimination cases, harassment cases, that I put together a 10-point plan to close the gender wage gap that focuses on, first of all, universal childcare, aligning the school day and the work day through before and after school programs, changes to employment law that stop punishing victims for reporting sexual harassment, and invests in women entrepreneurs in building a STEM pipeline. And this is part of our larger just economic recovery. It is necessary to get people back to work and allow them to work full time. But it's also really important that we focus on economic recovery. Our small businesses are one of the largest employers in the city. And so we need to do everything we can to help our small businesses not just survive, right, but thrive. And so I've released a really comprehensive economic recovery plan that you can see on my website, dougschneiderbk.com. And you can also see my transportation plan. Street safety is a big issue in the 39th Council District, where we've seen an epidemic level of street violence, of traffic violence. I want to just say one last thing before answering your questions, which is that one thing that's often lost in the conversation is constituent services. The most fundamental job of a council member is to provide constituent services, is to be a problem solver, to be a helper. It's not exactly the most exciting topic to end on, but at the end of the day, what people really want and deserve from a council member is someone who is committed to serving the community, to being a problem solver, to centering constituent needs. And that's what I plan to do. I, in fact, yesterday released a plan that's only about how I intend to provide constituent services. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about my approach, a little bit about my priorities. So thank you again for having me, and I really look forward to our conversation.
Oh, it's going to be great. So there is one thing I've got to ask you. So this, coming from your seat on the Democratic Party, there's one thing that I just got to know. Every single election, when we've got the judicial candidates coming up, I've got to work so hard to find out the smallest thing about them. What the hell, Doug? Why can't you guys give us a whole primer on judicial candidates?
So I actually wrote an op-ed about just this topic and about the obscurity of judicial elections. It's in the Gotham Gazette, and it says our elections are a joke, but they're not funny. And the reality is that we have a very convoluted way of electing judges, where different judges get elected in different ways, and the process is largely controlled by the party boss. And so the reason that they don't give you the information is because they don't want you to have that information. And it's actually one of the reasons why I ran for district leader in the first place, was to try to take on and reform, this kind of old Tammany Hall way of doing things, to give a voice back to the rank and file Democrats, where the power is supposed to be. And so I've really tried to shine a light on these types of inequities.
So give us some explain to us if you can, like, so you recognize, I figured you would know this is a problem because you're an attorney and this is kind of, you're in your wheelhouse and you're in the Democratic Party, so there you go. But so this is a thing that you are like, also, this is kind of a thing we got to work on. So how come, so what steps have you tried to take to get us there? And what would you have to do to really make it so that we can, like, I understand that the appointments are whatever political horse trading goes on, but we need to know what cases our representatives have heard and how they've landed on those cases. And I cannot easily find a case record. So how can someone just present that information in a way that we can look for it?
Yeah, so first of all, to change the system would really require a constitutional amendment to the New York State Constitution, and just change the way that we elect judges. I don't want to get too deep into this, but basically there are Supreme Court judges that are elected at a judicial nominating convention, which is controlled by the party boss. Then there is surrogate court, which is elected borough-wide. And then there is the civil court, where some civil court judges are elected citywide. Some civil court judges are elected from what's called a judicial district. And some are just appointed by the mayor. And so it is this completely convoluted system. And it's unnecessarily convoluted. I will say that what our approach has been is to try to, there's a group of reformers that I'm a part of, and we've tried to be transparent about what's going on, about our conversations. We've done judicial forums where we've tried to bring judges to come, or judicial candidates to come and to talk. It used to be that the decision making was done behind closed doors. We have tried to stop that from happening, and when they do try to do things behind closed doors, we've just come out and told everybody what has happened. It's really hard to get people's judicial records. Basically, you've got to be able to dig it up on on Westlaw or on one of the legal sites, and that's what we do. And we try to involve the community in the 44th Assembly District as much as possible, and really listen to what they're saying.
I know that somebody had once connected our Facebook group to a forum on some of our judicial candidates, and I would like to see that more widely utilized, because that's the hardest thing to find. But anyway, sorry, that was a little personal tangent. We're off to the races now on the real stuff. So I wanted to ask you, Doug, when you were, so I'm going to start on, I'm going to start with land use, with development and affordable housing. We're just going to get right into it. So, so the reason I wanted to start there is because that dichotomy of what the development of the condo complex near the pavilion, it always seems to be the dichotomy I'm talking about is where there seems to be this sense of, if you want affordable housing, you've got to develop with that density. That's kind of what we've built our system to be now. So I'm wondering for you, do you see that as our only way, like in an ideal world, if you could do it anyway, is that how it would go? Would you, as a councilman, if you won that seat, would you be jockeying for more affordable housing in that manner? Or are there other mechanisms that you would sort of seek out here?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that question. Obviously, it's on the minds of a lot of people. I think New York has a horrible system of developing affordable housing. The way that we do it, right, is we rely on private developers with a profit motive to build affordable housing and maybe make some infrastructure investments in exchange for selling away, New York City's skyline, allowing them to build higher, to build more, market and above market rate, housing. And this has created basically this upzoning, rezoning by rezoning conversation about building, where it's kind of in this intractable process where the city tries to extort the developer to get as much as possible from the developer, and the developer tries to threaten the government that they're going to bring in a FedEx depot to try to get to pay as little as possible or to give as little as possible. And who's ignored in the process but the community. Ultimately, we need to move away from that type of process. I think that first and foremost, we need a kind of a comprehensive plan, a long-term strategy where we look and we affirmatively seek to find places. The city is actually the one with the obligation to be building affordable housing. And right now we wait for developers to come to us with projects. Hey, this would be a great place to build, rather than do a comprehensive plan, look for opportunity, find the abandoned, office space ourselves to build. And so I really think that from a community perspective, from a transparency perspective, and from a long-term, a successful affordable housing perspective, a long-term comprehensive plan, a strategic plan would really push us forward. I think that we have to look at alternative methods of funding, right? Obviously, affordable housing is tough to build because people need to, people have to be able to make money to do it. And one thing that we could do is if New York were to have a private bank whose lending philosophy was to lend in the public good, and the city were to take, let's say, 1% of the money that they put in a private bank and invest it in a public bank, right? You could lend at a much better rate because your motive is the common good, allowing it to be built easier, cheaper with union labor. And so we should be exploring other models of funding to make it so that it becomes easier for the government to build affordable housing.
Of course, one of the issues we're going to run into under whatever mechanism we choose to build is that we're going to have a space issue, right? So let's just, and one thing that you had said somewhere else was you were talking about the equity and where to build, that the places that don't have a lot of green space, that isn't where we should be building. We have to balance it in places that have more green space. So it would be like an area like ours, right? And we do have the Gowanus area. So let's look at the Gowanus area right now. What would you, so you're probably going to inherit whatever is decided here, but just as you've gone through your work understanding the Gowanus situation, where do you stand on that proposal right now?
So I think that the Gowanus is really the perfect example of the problems that we were just talking about. I think that you have to evaluate it on its merits with the way that we do things now, because we can't not build in a city that has a housing crisis, right? But we also can't just continue business as normal. And we're talking about an area that has been a toxic waste dump for a long time, that already has, I mean, it's Park Slope, right? And where does the slope end? In Gowanus. So every time it rains, right, Gowanus floods with sewage. You're talking about a place with a vibrant arts community. I'm somebody who believes that the arts are really defining of a neighborhood. The Gowanus arts community is kind of it's a beloved space that provides this tremendous output, this tremendous positive energy that has these great events that you can go to, and rezonings tend to push artists out. They get forgotten. And so these are all big concerns. My biggest concern is with public place, where it shouldn't be lost on anybody that the site that they're planning to build the 100% affordable housing is on top of the most polluted black mayonnaise filled site. And I know that there are people telling us it's perfectly safe, and my approach to this is I'm not a scientist, so I rely on scientists, and I want to see a scientific consensus, somebody who's not paid by the state, somebody who's not paid by one of the parties, somebody to come in and tell me what the considerations are. Why should I believe that it's safe? Because if we're wrong, we are taking people who can probably least afford to move if something were to happen. And I couldn't have on my conscience that my decision in that situation caused people to get sick or to create Brooklyn's own version of Love Canal. And so those are kind of some of the considerations that I look into, that I consider when evaluating the Gowanus rezoning.
That makes sense. And do you, on the table right now, and the reason that I bring it up every time we have one of these things is the coalition's non-negotiable demands, which seem to have a little bit of traction with Brad Lander, our current councilman. So I imagine that is kind of what this will hinge upon, the proposal going forward, I mean. So in that proposal is a demand that the NYCHA housing be funded. So how are you feeling about that? And as councilman, you are going to be stewarding that. That would be your purview to make sure that those things don't fall through the cracks. And that to me sounds like the first one that will fall through the cracks. So how are you feeling about that NYCHA funding in terms of the overall plan? And then what would you do to make sure that that money doesn't get lost?
Yeah, so I think it is a prerequisite for approval of the of the Gowanus rezoning. I actually am fairly confident that at the end of the day there will be an agreement for those improvements to NYCHA. I think it's just our council members invested a lot in it, and the businesses have invested a lot in it. And so, I don't think people are going to be interested in walking away and not, not having this, prerequisite met. I think that the key to making sure things don't fall through the cracks, and this is a very frustrating part of this whole development story, is that we always get promised these infrastructure improvements. And we're always told it'll be done after we build our luxury housing, and it's 10 years later. We're still waiting for our park at the Barclays Center, and so these infrastructure investments have to be upfront investments. They can't be promises. So they need to be upfront investments, or they need to, if they can't be upfront investments, there needs to be a mechanism in the agreement to force it to happen, or to be compensated, so that if the developer's not going to do it, then they compensate the government for doing it. But it has to be taken seriously. And I think that the best way to do it personally is to do it up front. That is my my thoughts on how to make sure that it happens.
Christy, you had a follow-up, right?
Yeah, just right to that exact point. I mean, as we've talked about with other candidates, there has been building there has been building in the area in which we have been promised a certain number of affordable units. It has not happened multiple times, and there doesn't even seem to be, there are no lawsuits, there is no repercussion. So what is that mechanism that is in the agreement that makes them follow through? I mean, I would assume that clause is in the contracts that exist, and yet it's not enforced. So how would you go about enforcing it?
Well, this is actually something that the city overall doesn't do a good job with, right? We have all sorts of contracts that have performance requirements that aren't met, and the city loses millions of dollars to parties, to independent contractors, breaching their obligations, their contractual obligations that the city doesn't affirmatively seek to vindicate their rights. And I don't know if they're in the legal documentation. If they're not, they have to be. But a remedy is only as good as its enforcement. And so if the city isn't taking aggressive action to enforce these contractual obligations, then developers are going to keep getting away with it. And so this is really a law department issue. There needs to be a focus on these non-performance issues, and it's an economic issue too, right? Here we are, we're in a city that everybody's talking about the loss of revenue, and here's an example of millions of dollars that we could bring back into the city coffers simply by making our contracting partners live up to their obligations.
Yeah, we haven't done so good at that.
Not so much.
Barclays Center is a good example, although I understand that's a slightly different ball of wax since it's a state project, but nonetheless, a prime example. Let's get out of real estate for a second and move over into education, one of your top priorities there. So, so you've been talking about education in a number of ways. What we're going to focus on right now is desegregation. Of course, you know that here in our district, we have the District 15 desegregation plan that has been happening. There is also at the elementary school level that proposal to desegregate at the elementary school level in the northern part of our school district. So kind of some forward thinking going on that will require some movement of very young children. How are you feeling about that?
I think when it comes, it's different at every level, right? Our conversation is different at the elementary school level, it's different at the middle school level, and it's different at the high school level. I think that when it comes to the elementary school level, I think it relates right back to the conversation we were just having. The way to desegregate elementary schools is to desegregate neighborhoods. I believe that elementary schools should be neighborhood schools. I believe that every elementary school student should be able to walk to their neighborhood school. I am the redistricting that they've proposed, and they just kind of released their I guess their blueprint last week. The thing that concerns me most about it, and I'm not saying that like I'm opposed to it, but the thing that concerns me most is I honestly don't think that a 4-year-old kindergartner should be walking half a mile to get to school. I think that we should be trying to do this in a way that keeps neighborhood schools and focus on desegregating our neighborhoods. It is a much more intractable problem at the elementary school level than at the middle school level or at the high school level.
Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how you envision then making education more equitable, because of course we see the disparity so early on in education in our city. So we have to start somehow earlier. How do you envision that going?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think it's very important that we use, right, the word equity as opposed to equality. I think that we have to look at, we finally got the fair student funding, right? And that needs to be invested, right, to lift up the schools that have been unserved and underserved historically. I think that we have to look at so much more than just finances. We have to look also at the equitable distribution of teachers. The statistics are mind-blowing that in the highest performing, wealthiest schools, they have the fewest number of teachers who are in their first 3 years of teaching. But in the lowest income and the poorest performing schools have the highest percentage of new teachers, right? And the studies have shown that one of the biggest predictors or influencers of positive educational achievement is the quality of the teaching. And we know that like more experienced teachers in general are better in the classroom, right? And so when we're talking about this when we're talking about how do we get that equity, one of the things we have to talk about is, beyond fair student funding, is how we distribute teachers across our schools. Another example would be the calculation that they use for services for English language learners, where students, despite the fact that their students are still getting essentially still getting services, they test out of the program for purposes of funding. And so our programs, because of the formula, are being underfunded. And there are schools that don't have English language learning, English as a second language teachers, right? And we need to be ensuring that every school should have a ESL teacher, and we should be investing equally and making sure that schools that have large ELL populations are getting the resources that accurately reflect the work that is going on at the school in the ELL community. So those are just some examples of kind of the other areas of inequity beyond just the fair student funding that need to be addressed.
Christy, did you have a follow to that?
Not to that point, sorry.
Point. Okay. So let's just transition out. It's we have so much ground to cover, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, how is it already 5:40? So let's talk a little bit about the economic situation here in our neighborhood. It comes up all the time that we lament the loss of our favorite businesses and the open storefronts that we have. So talk to me a little bit about what you would champion as a council member to remedy that.
So as New York City places a lot of unnecessary burdens on our small businesses. In particular, we have a regulatory scheme where it is based upon surprise visits and a heavily regulated and reliant on fines and fees. If they make a surprise visit, if you don't have the record your shellfish record of when and where you brought your shellfish present on site when they come, that's a $600 fine, right? In most cities, first of all, it's an appointment-based thing. There are cure periods. So instead of punishing these businesses that are already struggling economically, financially, they give a cure period, right? So if you didn't have the paperwork, then you have 30 days to come and show them that you actually had it. It just wasn't there. And so one of the things that I would do is I would amend the laws to really reduce the instances where we rely on fines and fees based regulation, and shifting to a cure period, other than for things that directly affect the safety and health of the people working in the establishment or the people visiting the establishment. I think that we need to be talking about tax relief. So one example is, we could right now, as we try to help them recover specifically from COVID, every business is required to collect and transmit to the city sales tax, right? And instead of transmitting it to the city, we could instead, the city could use the money to grant it back to the business. There are industry-specific taxes like the liquor excise tax that we could suspend. And one area that I think is really ripe for a discussion is property tax. So most ground floor retail, like in a co-op, are assigned a certain percentage of the property tax bill. So when the assessment comes in the next year and it went up 50%, okay, their property tax that they have to pay also goes up, completely unrelated to the success, the financial, situation of the business, right? And this puts more businesses out of business than people realize, because you don't budget for a 50% increase in how much you have to pay in property tax, right? And that's an area that is really ripe for some type of reform to protect our small businesses from that spike in property taxes that really kills a lot of businesses. I think that if you look at the difference between Fifth Avenue and Seventh Avenue in terms of vacant storefronts, I think the real difference there is the Fifth Avenue bid, which has really been able to advocate for businesses, which has been able to sponsor the Open Streets program. And there have been a lot of attempts along 7th Avenue to try to form a bid, and it just has never come to fruition. And I think that we should really be trying to support bids, the creation of bids, as much as possible. One of the things that we've seen with the Open Streets program is that you need a bid to be able to sponsor it. But a lot of areas in the city, in particular, right, some of the lower income Black and Brown communities don't have bids, and that has essentially excluded them from the ability to have what we have on Fifth Avenue. And so I think we need to be looking at both how to assist the creation of bids, but also, I mean, that metric has to change. We can't just exclude people from this amazing program because their community, business community, and landlords haven't ever been able to form a bid.
Just to follow up on that, and in light of how many businesses we've lost over the last year and trying to get our community back to where it was, would you support commercial rent regulation to be able to keep these people in their businesses?
Yeah, I absolutely would. And I think that there are all sorts of ways to do that. One idea, which I think is an interesting idea, is essentially to give a tax break to a business, to a landlord, in exchange for the landlord agreeing to a below market long-term lease. Let's say 5 years, 10 years, with a guarantee of one renewal of that lease at that level. And so to incentivize, landlords to we see this all the time. The lease runs out, and then the landlord wants 4 times the money, and that's why we don't have Scalino anymore. And so that's one idea. I think another thing that I really like, but I don't know where the government can necessarily play the role, is I like the idea of the landlord having buy-in, so that the rent is based upon the success of the business, so that everybody has a incentive for the business to succeed. The landlord has some skin in the game, and if the business is successful, right, then the landlord is successful. And there are some places in New York, in Manhattan, that have experimented with that. I can't remember where I read that article during the pandemic, but somewhere I did. And I think that's a really interesting idea. Most malls do that with their corner tenants. Your Macy's at your big mall is typically paying a portion to the mall, and that's how they have a base rent combined with kind of this profit share. But so those are some of the things that we can do. I mean, the reality is, however we do it, we need to control commercial rent. Otherwise, we're just going to see, more and more banks and pharmacies, right, and fewer local businesses, restaurants, the places that really give neighborhoods their character.
That the commercial rent control bill is still sitting on the council floor and not getting much traction. So that doesn't, as good of an idea as it seems like it could be, and as much of a solution as that can offer neighborhoods like ours, it doesn't seem like that's going to be coming anytime soon, unless something changes dramatically somewhere along the line.
The real estate lobby is the biggest lobby in New York City politics, and they have a lot of they have a lot of influence, and so they've been able to put really put a lot of pressure on members to not support commercial rent control. I think that you're seeing more and more folks like myself who are not taking real estate money. But I think at the end of the day, you have to have the conversation. These issues are all nuanced. I like to say that I'm running to make nuance cool again. And so you need to sit down.
That's a heck of a slogan, Doug.
That will only work in the 39th Council District, I think.
Does it even fit on a t-shirt?
That's very funny. My staff wants to put it on the t-shirt. My 2 slogans, I'm running to make nuance cool again, and then schools, sidewalks, and civil rights. But yeah, you have to sit down and have the conversation and be firm, but try to move to find an area that can move, the industry opposition towards something to save our small businesses. Again, if we don't have our small businesses, then we don't have a city. I mean, yeah. It is I think either the first or the second largest employer are small businesses. And so we really all have a vested interest, whether you're trying to build housing or you're trying to save a small business. You have the same incentive. You should have the same incentive, because there's not going to be anywhere to live in your building if our small businesses go away and people lose their employment, right? So we've got to try to figure something out, because what we have right now for too long hasn't worked, and we're really, especially with the pandemic, reaching an even bigger crisis point than the crisis that already existed pre-pandemic.
Christy's got a question from our community.
Right, so let's see. Let me go to my. So as you know, I'm sure as a member of Park Slope Together, we have a lot of, we have some hyper local issues that we also need help with. So this is from the community around that massive construction that's been going on St. John's forever. So the question is, in the few blocks around 6th Avenue and St. John's, there's been city authorized street construction. A number of landmarked homes were damaged. Residents in that area who have dealt with power and water outages have mobilized and have asked us to get a commitment from future council members about the work in the future. They want to know, will you continue to serve as chair for the existing task force to implement the guardrails, to keep the appropriate departments and contractors involved in the city construction accountable for the work they do and the impact it has on the neighborhood?
Yeah, so what has happened in St. John's, on St. John's is just reprehensible. It's outrageous. What they have had to live with, lack of water, inconsistent electricity, the complete disrespect of their lives has really been outrageous. And I privately was asked that question by the same group, and gave my commitment to being their largest, loudest advocate. It goes hand in hand with what I was talking about a council member's job to provide constituent services, to be their voice, to connect, to find solutions to complicated problems for the people, to listen, to actively listen, and to go out and do the work necessary to better the lives of the people who live in your district.
So we're gonna just ask, we're gonna try to fit in right now in a very short time span. Policing, really quickly. We're asking these huge issues and, no time to discuss really. But here we are. So, so when you're talking about police, where do you fall in the defunding purview? Is there a dollar amount that would meet what you feel is acceptable? Are you part of the $3 billion camp, for example? Or do you have a different strategy for a different philosophy for how the policing can look in our city?
Yeah, so defund is a slogan. It's not really a policy. And so I think it's really important to dig down to identify what we are talking about when we use that phrase so that everybody's on the same page. We saw, I think it was in St. Paul, Minnesota, where they passed a defund bill and half the people thought it was a value statement and the other half thought that what they had passed was an actual, abolishing of the police. And so I think it's really important not to just rely on, this slogan, which even doesn't, it's a bad slogan. It doesn't mean what it says. And so I think what we are talking about is the reallocation of funds from the NYPD budget, right, to social services organizations to address the issues that number one, they have expertise on, and number two, are drivers of the crime that's committed in the city. We're talking about addiction, poverty, mental health, homelessness, right? These issues. And so I think that the budget as a moral document, right? We should be spending more on these things and less on policing. I laugh because in this city, when you see a raccoon, you're supposed to call the 911. You're supposed to call the police, which is crazy, right? And so we need to limit the number of situations where the police are the default, and we need to reallocate that money to the agencies that are better suited both to deal with it, but also preventative, right? Investing in summer youth employment projects, in small businesses, in minority and women-owned businesses, in mental health services. But we are not going to budget ourselves out of the policing crisis. We need to fundamentally change the way that policing is done in the city. And one of the major ways to do that is to create real accountability. Right now, it is the commissioner who has final say over discipline. And I think people, there's been a lot of focus on the fact that he hardly ever, gives any discipline. And it's really a situation where you have the wolf watching the hen house. The commissioner could not be more conflicted. He's got the union, if he disciplines officers, he loses the rank and file. The unions are going after him. And so we really need to remove the decision-making when it comes to discipline from the commissioner and place it in a neutral body, whether that's CCRB, oath, some other entity, either existing or to be created. We also have to have accountability for conduct, not just in the street, but in the courts. Us criminal defense attorneys have a phrase that we use when talking about cops who testify. We call it test-lying. I'll give you an example real quick. I had a case where I represented a client, and I proved in this case that the officer had made the entire thing up, literally made the entire thing up, tried to frame my client. It wasn't the first time that this he had been found incredible. And 6 months after my case, he was promoted, that officer. And that's that's the opposite of accountability, right? So we cannot let this continue to happen. I think fundamentally, if we are going to change policing in this city, if we are going to get police reform, we have to get rid of Pat Lynch and Ed Mullins, the head of the PBA and the SBA, who are the two most destructive forces in New York City politics, and who are the most fiercest opponent of any type of police reform. And they are propped up. Their power comes from the older, senior, white, Republican, Long Island living officers who dominate the unions and prop up and stifle the voice of the newer officers who are predominantly of color, who live within the 5 boroughs. And when we're talking about shrinking the size of the NYPD, it's a unionized workforce. So that means that it's last in, first out. And so if you try to shrink the size of the NYPD through the budget, what you're going to end up doing is the first out are going to be the younger officers who haven't been indoctrinated in these bad habits, who live in the city that they police, who are diverse, who have a new voice, and you're actually going to strengthen the officers who represent the biggest problem. And so, my approach to this would be to get that reduction through attrition. And I think the way to do that is to reinstitute the law that requires NYPD officers to live within the 5 boroughs. Unfortunately, that specifically has to be done at the state because it is a state exemption. However, they are not exempted from having to live within a certain vicinity, a certain proximity of the 5 boroughs, right? And so my approach would be to pass a law requiring them to live within 5 miles of the 5 boroughs. And I think if you did that, they would take their packages and they would go home. And you would both shrink and diversify the NYPD. You would break the power of the people who prop up Lynch and Mullins, and you would be able to give a voice to these newer, younger officers. And so I think that as we talk about reducing the size of the NYPD, that's the only way that you can do it in a way that doesn't strengthen the wrong people.
So you think the way to reform is shrink the NYPD through requiring officers to live here in the 5 boroughs, and then also to invest in the other agencies that handle all of our biggest calls, like like mental health, for example, and those agencies would remain independent of the NYPD.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, there's much more to that, right? There's creating accountability. There is demilitarizing the NYPD. The NYPD is able to participate in military surplus programs. And that's why you see them in tactical gear when they show up to peaceful protests. We need to eliminate agencies and policies that incentivize arrest and prosecution. One example being there's the Office of the Special Narcotics Prosecutor, which is a remnant of the racist war on drugs that reflects a outdated approach and view of drug use and addiction. And that's a $26 million program that has to justify itself by going out, arresting people and prosecuting people for what is ultimately, an addiction, issue. We need to focus on decarceration. We need to focus on alternative to incarceration programs. The Brooklyn DA and the Brooklyn Criminal Court actually created the national model of a drug court. It's called the STEP, Street Screening Treatment Enhancement Part, and it works. I mean, it's my favorite court to be in. I've represented countless clients who went in after being arrested with tremendous addiction, deep addiction, for example, to opiates, and left a year later sober, with a GED, a job, and a clean record. And these programs work. We need to expand them. We need to expand them beyond just addiction, which they are doing in Brooklyn. Brooklyn really is doing a good job at experimenting here. And so that is how we can move away from the carceral system.
Cool.
I have a lot more to say about police reform, but it's 6:02.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know how to gracefully exit from that conversation and be like, well, thanks, Doug. That's a good night. So we're just going to act like that was a great transition out. Here's our
insert transition here.
Yeah, insert it. Here's our final question for you. So if you are to win the seat and you would get a singular 2-year term, what one thing would you want to accomplish in those 2 years?
I would want to make our streets safer. I would want to, first of all, not surprisingly, make sure that Department of Sanitation cleans out curb cuts and crosswalks when it snows, because that's a civil rights issue to me. People have a right to get around the city, and people in wheelchairs, the elderly, are rendered homebound when that happens, because they can't get around unless you can scale one of those mountains. But I also want to see greater enforcement. I want to see us start building out bike lanes. I want to see us using what are called split phase traffic signals, which is a dedicated left turn or right turn light, so that a pedestrian and a car are never competing for a crosswalk at the same time. And if I can make a dent in the epidemic of traffic violence we have, I'd be very happy. If I were to be known as the sidewalks guy, I'd be very, very happy. We haven't even talked about those sidewalks that are that far off, the curb cuts that are that far off the ground. So every time my daughter's stroller hits it, she almost falls over. So those are the things that I'd be very happy. If I could make our streets safer and our transportation safer and more accessible.
Would you also have a T-shirt with that as a slogan?
Yeah, I have a lot of, I guess, my slogans, I guess, fit on a T-shirt. Clear the crosswalks, I guess.
There you go.
Sony, we've asked every candidate about the electric bikes except the guy who probably has the strongest position on them. So can you give us your electric bike position in
but really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, really fast. The electric bike situation reflects the tensions that we have of competing interests, where we had the people who we're talking about are trying to make a living, right? And their job is to get somewhere as fast as possible, and that is in conflict with the safety issues. I will say that an electric bike, a bike period, never belongs on a sidewalk. I have to keep my kids so close to my hip because I'm so scared of one of those electric bikes zooming down the street, I've seen actual motorcycles on the sidewalk, right? And if any of this is going to work, we can plan as much as we want, right? But if any of this is going to work, people have to abide by what the rules are and just do the safe thing. And so, that's the situation here. Electric bikes, any bikes, don't belong on the sidewalk. I mean, earlier today, I was on Ocean Parkway on the other side of the street of the bike lane, and there was a bike on the sidewalk. Just go across the street to the bike lane. So, I think that, we have what, another half hour to talk about this?
All right, listen, Doug. So let me just add, so now Jesus, Christy, now you've got a whole thing.
Sorry.
All right, so
I had to do it.
So I just have to ask this. The part about this that you were saying at the beginning that really it gets a little sticky, right? Is that we can recognize that the people who are biking are not the people we also want to ticket. I mean, naturally, there has to be a penalty, but adding a financial burden to them is going to just not be the way to go, I feel like. So recognizing that there's a safety issue and recognizing that there is there are humans on the other end of this who have their own issues. How would you actually approach it? Like what would you do to try to remedy the situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's ultimately an infrastructure problem, right? The city does not have good biking infrastructure that allows for bicyclists to get places safely and fast. And if we had that infrastructure, if we build that infrastructure, then it wouldn't be an issue, right? If there was a place for them to safely ride at the speed at which they need to ride in order to do their job well, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. And at the end of the day, if we can't do that, there are things, when you have these competing interests, right? There are things that one is going to take precedence over the other. And if a law isn't a law if we're scared to enforce it. And so whatever the enforcement mechanism, and I'm somebody who doesn't like fines and fees. I'm somebody that obviously we used to confiscate them. But we need to have a enforcement mechanism, whether it's the owner, whether it's licensing. We need to have something that enforces it before more people get hurt, before more people get hit. And these are the complicated issues that require nuance. That where you have these competing interests that are both valuable interests, both positive interests that are somewhat competing against each other. Well, now we're going to go to 6:45.
Yeah. Well, we know what you say about nuance, Doug. It's so cool.
I'm running to make nuance cool again.
All right, so that's where we're going to end it for real. Doug, thank you so much for a spirited, Christy, stop it. Thank you so much for a spirited conversation and for sharing your thoughts and visions for our community with us. We really appreciate it.
And thank you for providing this platform. It's been a lot of fun.
We're glad you enjoy it.
Yeah, have a great night.
You too.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks.
All right, Park Slope. We did it, right, Christy? Oh, Christy's out. We will be back here again on Tuesday, where we will be joined by Justin Krebs. And then on Wednesday, we've got Jessica Simmons. So we will see you next week. Have a wonderful weekend. I hope I see you out in the neighborhood.